Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Single Malt Strategy. This is episode 43. I'm your host, Jean, the Strategy Wargamer, and with me today is Cody Ouimet, producer of the recently released Steam Early Access game, Axis and Allies 1942 Online. Cody, welcome to the podcast.
I have like a whole slew of questions. One of the things that I wanted to mention about this game is how I'm very grateful that you guys made this game because I don't know how many years it's been since we had an Axis and Allies game on the PC. I think it's been over a decade at this point.
I think it's about 15 years. I think the last official one was in 2003.
Wow. And I was always asking myself, how is it there hasn't been one since doing this for 15 years? I mean, you would think that would be like the automatic game to make, right?
I think there's a few reasons for that, primarily kind of just in terms of how Hasbro, Wizards of the Coast, and Avalon Hill deal with their digital platforms. So up until recently, with the release of Magic the Gathering Arena, they primarily relied on licensors to make games out of their properties. So that's where you saw things like Baldur's Gate or Neverwinter Nights kind of come from, where there's a third-party developer like Beamdog who goes to these companies and kind of wants to make a game using their IP, and they make a case or pitch, what that game could possibly be to get their support to kind of go behind it and grant the license to the company. So it could be that no developers have kind of hopped on that Axis and Allies bandwagon until we did. I don't know if that's the case, but I think as Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro kind of really figure out what they want to do with their digital platform, and I really think that they're making a lot of positive progress with things like Magic the Gathering Arena, and obviously supporting us with Axis and Allies 1942 Online, that we might start to see some of their other IP enter the digital space as well too. So I think it just has a lot to do with timing and maybe developer interest. But I'm glad that we were able to get the license and make a great game from it.
Does it make sense to bring every single board game to the digital platform? Like, do you see kind of like more games besides Axis and Allies, kind of like the game Diplomacy or other games? I know they have like a Risk port on the iPhone, but I don't think there is one for the PC, as far as I know. Would it make sense to bring these games to the mobile, to the desktop?
I think there's a market for digital board games on PC. I mean, obviously, we just made Axis and Allies. I think there's unique challenges in figuring out how you want to interpret a board game onto the PC. If you want to do like a direct kind of one-for-one adaptation, or if you want to take some creative liberties and try to make something that's unique from the board game on a PC or a mobile or like a Switch or something like that. I think there's a lot of interesting design challenges for that and how you want to approach it. One way, if you do kind of more of a one-to-one direct port, you run into the limitations of like a board game interface on a PC or another device, where you're constraining yourself trying to adhere to kind of that physical play space in a virtual world. Alternatively, if you take more creative freedoms with the board game in interpreting it for digital space, you may alienate some of that audience from the board game that are looking for a digital version of, or a kind of a digital version to play, for whatever reason, whether it's they want to be able to practice and play against an AI, or if they want to play with their friends asynchronously or kind of in person, whatever that format may be. Sometimes you can risk alienating that existing audience if you kind of take more creative freedoms. So if you look in like some of the spaces, there's some games that are very much a kind of one-to-one adaptation. There's other games that are starting to kind of crop out that take a little bit more creative freedom with everything. So it's an interesting space for sure. You get things like, say, Settlers of Catan just had like that VR version that just came out that I haven't had the chance to play yet. That's something that's taking a little bit more of almost taking that creative freedom and that direct adaptation, just kind of mushing them together, because you're literally recreating playing at a physical table just in a virtual environment. So
I can't wait to see how VR kind of like, I haven't seen that gameplay or any of that, but it'll be really kind of interesting how that kind of works out, where you can put like VR and almost have like a board game in front of you with people halfway around the world.
yeah, there's some interesting games that have kind of already done that. That Catan VR one I just mentioned. There's some VR strategy games that kind of have that similar feeling. There's one called, I think it's called Brass Tactics, and you're basically on this like really long table. You can see your opponent on the other side, and you're kind of directly interacting with the units and everything that spawn all around. But it gives me like that's like a live action, like a Warhammer type vibe almost, where my units are spawning and they're moving, but the way the battlefield looks is kind of like this really large digital diorama. And it's really, really interesting to like you physically pick up your units. If you're playing with like an Oculus Touch or something, you physically pick them up and like move them around. It's very, very interesting. It's very cool. I can't wait to see more stuff like that.
Yeah, something like that would be very appealing to me. It might actually make me spend the actual couple $100 and buy like an Oculus Rift or like a VR kind of thing.
Yeah. The studio I used to work at did a lot of VR stuff, so we had a lot of like not necessarily competitive analysis, but like design analysis on like different studios and how they interact with VR and how they're kind of utilizing VR and overcoming some challenges. So yeah, it's really cool.
So since you mentioned the studio you previously worked at, I kind of want to dive in a little bit about you, because generally the first part of the podcast, the interview, I wanted to kind of like see what kind of motivated you, what inspired you to kind of like dive into strategy games, to start developing strategy games. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to ask you, like, where did it all begin? Where did like that inspiration, was this something that you were like, as soon as you hit like, 18, you're like, yep, this is what I'm going to do for my career?
So strategy games with me actually go way far back to like when I was 4 or 5.
Oh, wow.
One of the first strategy games I ever played, if not the first, that I really have like a distinct memory of playing is actually Warcraft 2. I remember getting like a PC Gamer or PC World magazine way back when, right after my family kind of got our first like modern family computer, when I was 4 or 5, and there was a shareware disc that had the shareware version of Warcraft 2, and I think it only had like 5 or 6 levels, and I played it like no one's business. Like I remember having an NES and a Genesis and stuff like that, but that shareware disc of Warcraft 2, I probably played those 5 levels, I don't know, 200 times, 300 times.
Huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember they used to put games in the those magazine game in those magazine subscriptions. I forgot about that.
Yeah. You used to get like a little floppy disk and eventually a CD and stuff like that. So we had like a floppy disk that had the Warcraft 2 shareware. We pop it in, we had to go into DOS to load it up. And then, I played that thing endlessly. And then I remember shoveling driveways and stuff like that because, I live in Canada and we're covered in snow. Trying to get money for the battle chest so I could play Warcraft 1. Played Warcraft 1. Didn't like it. Played Warcraft 2 even more, and that really set the stage. So then I got into like Command & Conquer, a lot of real-time strategy games, Dune, StarCraft when it came out, and then kind of so on from there. So when I play PC games, personally, 90% of the time I'm usually playing a strategy game of some sort. With a little bit more mainstream, I don't have the time to do a lot of the kind of more off-brand or indie strategy games, unfortunately. I do kind of, if they pop up in popularity a lot, I'll definitely make time to play them. But with a family and working a lot, I don't have as much time as I'd like to kind of experiment with some of the newer or kind of more indie strategy games. But it has definitely always been like a primary passion of mine is strategy games. So the fact that I get to work on one now as an adult is great. It's awesome.
Yeah, I totally feel you on that, because I was, I have a newborn, so I always take the night shift to feed, and throughout the night I have to feed him. So a lot of times I'm like on my phone or my iPad, I'm trying to see, all right, what can I do for the next 20 minutes or a half hour that because he sips his bottle. So I'm like, what kind of strategy game can I play? And I usually have a couple on my iPad or my iPhone. And I was just thinking in my head, I'm like, when's the next time can I play Axis and Allies? And I went on the iPad just in case you guys like kind of maybe did it like a hidden surprise, like, oh, by the way, we released the iPad version today. So I typed it in. I was like, it didn't pop in, but started thinking, I'm like, what? I was asking my girlfriend, I was like, hey, can you watch the baby for like an hour or two while I get a session in of a little Access and Allies? I've been always a big fan growing with the Access and Allies. That was kind of like a passion of mine. So I wanted to kind of ask you, like, how long have you been at Beamdog? How long have you been at that company?
So I've been at Beamdog for just over a year now. I started July 2018.
Oh, okay. And before that, you were with?
So before that, I was with another studio here in Edmonton called Serious Labs. They did serious games, like educational games and VR simulators for heavy industry. So they use game engines like Unity and Unreal to build kind of training platforms for oil, gas, construction, and mining. I was with them for a number of years, and prior to that, I was with BioWare, and I worked on Dragon Age Origins, Dragon Age 2, and I touched some of the other IP that they had at the time, so like Mass Effect and Star Wars: The Old Republic. I helped out with them periodically, but I was primarily on Dragon Age.
Oh, wow. That's I remember Dragon Age. That had some that really made some waves in the industry. Very popular game.
Yeah.
So I know you're a junior producer at Beamdog. What are the responsibilities of a junior producer?
So junior producer is it's kind of just like a official title, like on paper. In reality, I'm kind of the only producer on Axis and Allies. So as a producer, my primary responsibilities are kind of maintaining the vision and scope of the project. So I work with our designers and our developers to kind of map out where we're going to do things, when we're going to do things, what those things are going to look like, making sure that they're adhering to the project vision, and kind of owning that project vision in lieu of kind of like a lead creative designer or something like that. And then making sure that everything that's going into the game when we release it or when we do a patch is kind of to the quality and spec that it needs to be. So making sure that the game, the team, everyone is kind of adhering to Beamdog's kind of core values when we're producing stuff, and then communicating that out we're working with our marketing to kind of communicate that out to the audience. But yeah, my primary kind of responsibilities are maintaining the project vision, scope of it, and then kind of guiding the team from point A to point B. Point A being the start of the project and point B being the end of the project.
When did you guys start developing on Axis and Allies? Where did it like all begin?
So development of Axis and Allies started, I want to say early 2017, I believe, maybe late 2016. That's kind of when the initial kind of scoping out of what the project could be kind of happened, kind of the development of the vertical slice and the rough framework of everything. Primary development really took off late 2017 and then kind of slowly grew over 2018. When we did our initial announcement back in February this year, the game was in kind of a state that we were happy with, but there was still a lot of room for improvements. So once we announced, we kind of made the decision to maybe put the brakes on a little bit to kind of do a drastic revamp of the core user experience and that new user experience. And that kind of brought us to where we're at now when we released at the end of July.
So what kind of inspired you guys to take up the challenge of porting Axis and Allies to the PC desktop? Like, was it like that you played the 2003 version and were like, well, we really need to make a better one and kind of just dive into it? Or what kind of pushed you guys to do that?
So this is actually a passion project of the company CEO, Trent Oster. He was down at a Wizards of the Coast licensing summit, I believe, back in 2016. And because we work with them on the Dungeons & Dragons classic games, Baldur's Gate, Neverwinter Nights, Icewind Dale, stuff like that. And he was talking with someone and passing, I think Axis and Allies had come up. I think Wizards of the Coast, Avalon Hill was kind of where they were starting working on Axis and Allies and Zombies, I believe. And growing up, Trent kind of had two passions. One was Dungeons & Dragons. The other was tanks, and through tanks was Axis and Allies. He remembers playing the board game a lot with his friends in high school. Very much like a core passionate appeal to him. So from that kind of just offhanded remark, he started pursuing the license. Actually got the license, if I remember correctly, fairly easily. And then we're kind of started beginning on kind of what this game could be.
Wow, okay. And what kind of challenges did you face, like porting this legendary board game to the PC desktop? Because we had numerous studios that tried over the years, and to say they failed would be an optimistic take on it.
Yeah, so Axis and Allies is very interesting as a board game to adapt. The game is very complex in terms of its rule set. I often like to kind of give it the pet name of Axis and Allies 1942 edge cases of the game. A lot of the rules and stuff like that for the game, a lot of the challenge for us developing the game was the asynchronous nature in which we were developing it. One of the core tenets that we really had with the game was we wanted to make sure that with our digital adaptation, we were trying to identify a lot of the issues that people had playing the game, the physical board game. One of those big things was it's really, really difficult sometimes to get a group of 5 friends together to play a board game for an extended period of time. A lot of the times when you play a long-form game like Axis and Allies or Diplomacy or any of these other kind of big multi-hour, multi-day kind of board games, is that time commitment. And as we all get older, get families, whatever the case may be, or jobs, that gets harder and harder and harder. So when we decided to go with an asynchronous game format, that was to address that kind of primary hurdle to playing the actual board game. So a lot of the design challenges we had in adapting the game were with that asynchronous play. So I'm sure you've noticed, like, we don't have things like allied carrier support for fighters or transports. When an aircraft carrier is destroyed and the fighters aren't, the fighters hang around in the zone for an extended period of time until the player's next turn, rather than landing automatically or within kind of one turn, if I recall correctly, is the actual rule. So a lot of the design challenges were kind of directly associated with that decision to stick with asynchronous play rather than like directly adapting the rules. If we were doing like a live synchronous play style, those challenges wouldn't be, I don't think, as drastic as they are with asynchronous. So asynchronous is you can log in and take your turn at your own time, and no other player needs to be there in order for you to take your turn. So that's kind of where the defense profiles come from, the whole automatic losses on defense. You're not reliant on another player in order to complete your turn. Everything that you do on your turn can be done simply by yourself and with the kind of game helping or handling the opponent's actions for them where required. You can do your turn independent of anyone else. So I'm sure if you've got a long history playing the actual board game Axis and Allies, there's a lot of cases where you do need that other player interaction. So we had to figure out ways to automate that in a way that didn't remove player agency or player choice from a lot of things, or kind of had to consider those edge cases where you really do need that direct player input at that time. And that's things like allied fighters and allied transports, in order to avoid things like player trolling or lack of communication sometimes with kind of figuring out how you actually want things to go. So that's why we remove those. We do have some ideas on how to safely implement those kind of going forward in the future. So we're going to be experimenting as we go through early access with figuring out ways to bring some of those elements that we removed for asynchronous play back into the game while still holding true that asynchronous pillar that the game is built on.
Wow, okay. We just did a multiplayer session a couple of days ago, and I was under the impression that you had to be online at the same time to play the game, but now this is with the asynchronous, I can actually just, when Matt, the historical gamer, can do his turn, and then my turn, we could do them separately at different times. That's pretty awesome. That's really awesome.
Yeah, I think that's we've been really trying to enforce with our marketing and with our social kind of presence the asynchronous nature of the game. I think a lot of people have been playing the game live and synchronously. So like I joined a multiplayer game, I'm going to sit there and kind of see it through all the way to the end, which isn't the case. The game is definitely designed to kind of hop on, take your turn, hop off. You get the email notification to hop on for your turn when it shows up. and you can hop on and take your turn. So I do think, while a lot of people have been playing synchronously, I do think that as the game has been out, more and more people are kind of realizing the asynchronous nature and kind of starting to take advantage of that.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to start. Now that I know it's there, I'm going to start actually doing that, because that was exactly one thing that you were mentioning, that I generally run into that, where, I have to take care of the baby for the next 4 hours. Matt might be free, but then by the time I get off, Matt is busy doing something else. And then, so our schedules always kind of collide, and it's very difficult to kind of do like a game session night kind of thing. So I think like this is like the perfect solution to that.
Yeah, like we even saw it in the office. Like we did a lot of internal play testing throughout all of Beamdog, not just on the Axis and Allies team. So we would have people on, say, the team doing the Baldur's Gate port for the consoles. They would hop on, maybe do their turns early on in the morning, and then we would go on after lunch, say, and take our turns. A lot of back and forth, to the point where we were actually losing quite a fair bit of kind of development time to playing Axis and Allies. So definitely really worked out for us in the studio, and we were really, really excited to see how the community respond to that. The idea of being able to, say, have 5 or 10 games going at once, but you're not committed to sitting down and playing them at any given time. So, I'll get an email saying, hey, it's your turn in a game. I'll hop on for 5 to 10 minutes to take my turn, and then log off, and then kind of move on with my life. So, we think it's a perfect format for, that older, that kind of, that busy player who has a lot to do in their life, but really, really likes Axis and Allies and wants to find a way to play without dedicating the time and effort to play the actual board game. So, we're really looking forward to continuing to get the community feedback on what they're really, really liking about the game and what they would like to see kind of moving forward.
So I had another question lined up, but I want to kind of piggyback off that, because you were saying it's a perfect opportunity to kind of like go in, play 5 or 10 minutes, and then jump right off. And as soon as you were mentioning that, the first thing that popped up in my head was like iPhone or iPad. Like I can't tell you how many times that like I'll be on, like, I have 5 or 10 minutes. I'm like, geez, what can I do in 5 or 10 minutes? So is there any interest in possibly bringing this to the mobile platform?
Yeah, I think Beamdog has a reputation of having all our games on as many platforms as possible. So when we did the enhanced versions of Baldur's Gate, obviously they launched first on tablet, and then onto PC, and then onto phone, and now they're coming onto consoles. So that's very much a kind of studio mantra that we would like to hold forward on Axis and Allies as we move forward. So we are interested in additional platforms for the game, but right now we're really, really focused on getting the PC version that we've released into early access into a really, really good spot, so that we can make sure that the people who are playing it on PC are really, really happy with the game. And then we can devote the dedicated time and resources to make sure that the mobile or tablet version of the game, when and if we get to them, are as good as they possibly can be, and really take advantage of the interfaces and the input methods on those devices compared to a PC, because playing on a tablet isn't quite like playing with a mouse and a keyboard. So there's some interesting design, I don't want to say challenges, but quirks that we really have to figure out, and then we would be able to really run forward with that kind of once we get to that point.
Do you feel like, I know you guys have Baldur's Gate on the iPad and on the phone. I'm kind of curious, because the new iOS 13 is coming out this fall. Do you feel like, I know they're offering like mouse support for the iPad and Xbox and PlayStation controller support. Would that, like, as a developer of this mobile game, would you guys be interested in altering the game to kind of sync with those devices?
It would be I think it would be possible. One thing we don't want to do is build a game that is reliant on having a kind of that third party input device for your tablet. Like if you got your phone on you and you want to pop it out on a phone while you're waiting for the train or a bus or something like that, or if you're on the bus, you're not necessarily going to have, like a DualShock 4 and Xbox controller on you to take your turn necessarily. I mean, some people might, but I would say for the vast majority, that's kind of like, hey, I'm at home, I want to play like Knights of the Old Republic on my phone. rather than using touch inputs, I can use a controller. So while that's something that we could definitely look into for, that kind of at-home experience with those, we wouldn't want to make it so that's the primary input method. It would be kind of like an ancillary or secondary version for those who are so inclined, I think. We definitely want to make sure that if we're putting something out on a device, it works within that device's kind of limitations or with what it comes with out of the box.
What is much more, I would say, alluring to a developer like you? Is the mobile platform kind of like superseding console in terms of popularity? Because I know like PUBG and Fortnite came to the iPad or iPhone last year, and I've been seeing these insane kind of statistics and insane headlines in the news where 70 million subscribers. It was kind of ridiculous from some of these headlines that I've been seeing. Do you see kind of like mobile surpassing like console anytime soon?
Well, I mean, you can look at the install base for mobile, and it's drastically higher than the install base for a console. That being said, they're vastly different platforms in terms of how you interact with them. So developing something for mobile or tablet is pretty different compared to developing something where you've kind of got that dedicated input device like a controller or a keyboard or a mouse. So while I think like the possibilities for a wider audience are probably stronger on mobile or tablet compared to a console or PC even, the kind of way you go about designing a game for either of those platforms, like for either a console for mobile, are kind of different. Like Epic didn't look at releasing Fortnite or that game company, I think, or whatever the PUBG company is. I can't remember them off the top of my head. Didn't look at developing for mobile until the PC game was kind of in a pretty decent spot. And then they looked at porting it over. Obviously, they had that controller idea that you had in mind with some of those as well, too. So I think it was basically like, okay, we've hit market saturation on these platforms. Let's move over to this platform. And how can we really figure it out there? And then you've got some companies that are focusing almost exclusively on the mobile space, like Kabam. And they're finding a lot of success and have kind of really figured out that market. So I think there's a lot of challenges for either one of them. Me personally, as a developer, I do think that Axis and Allies does have a natural fit or a natural home on mobile. But I am personally, like, as far as just like development in general, I do prefer some of the more dedicated platforms like a console or PC, just because I like that dedicated space to play my games. But I do appreciate a mobile or tablet game that really does, hit that, like, I got 5 or 10 minutes to play a game and really gets that experience and nails that experience home and does a really, really good job at it. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to, future mobile games, things like, say, Diablo Immortal, stuff like that are kind of taking that experience that I would normally have on a PC or a console, bringing that over to a mobile device and really seeing how they really figure out that market and what that device can do and that play style. I love looking at other games and kind of analyzing them and kind of figuring out what works well, what doesn't work well, what you could do different, that kind of stuff. So I'm really interested to see what some of these more gaming platform dedicated games coming over to mobile, how they're handling that transition.
The other question I had was, I noticed in a recent patch that you guys had, it said something about enhancements to touch-based interactions. And yep. I was kind of curious, did you guys add in the ability to kind of like, I'm assuming since you guys made it for the desktop, it was kind of like you added this touch-based interaction update for like the Surface Pro devices and touch-based Windows computers?
No, actually, that was for trackpads, specifically the Mac trackpads on laptops. So if you've got like the Magic Pad on an iMac, for instance, or if you've got the kind of big old touchpad on a MacBook Pro, it was primarily for that. So while there's a few of us in the studio who do use MacBooks for development, myself included, a lot of us have mice that we use kind of on day-to-day rather than with the trackpads. So we just made some tweaks to the interface when you're using the trackpad only when you're playing the game. So Before, when you're to do scrolling, you'd have to scroll the trackpad all the way to the edge of the screen and then kind of hold it. It was a little awkward, so we put in a gesture control for panning around using the click and drag functionality, and then changing how we zoomed in. So before was you'd have to use 2 fingers and then move up and down to zoom in and out. Now it uses the pinch in, pinch out gesture to control zoom, so it's a little bit more natural and concurrent with a lot of other apps and devices and stuff like that. So that was primarily geared towards trackpad supports, not necessarily like a Surface Pro or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah, like a Surface Pro and Windows touchpad devices like that may or may not work, but they're not officially supported. The game may or may not recognize, like I can't remember specifically how well or how Windows differentiates like touch input from mouse input. Compared to say like an iPhone or Android phone, for instance, where that how the game registers that input is a little bit different, or how websites and stuff like that interact with those is considered different. It's like on touch rather than on click. So I think some people might have been playing the game on a Surface Pro 4. I think I've seen some people on the forums and communities mentioning that they've been playing on a Surface Pro 4, but I can't speak to how well the actual touch input works compared to the mouse and keyboard.
So kind of like backtracking to the core of the game, I did want to ask you, so there were numerous other developers that try to make Axis and Allies port of the game. I wanted to ask you, like, what did you guys like play the previous games and try to like see what they did wrong and kind of try to improve on them? Did you like learn anything from their failed attempts?
We did look at the 98 version briefly. It's not the easiest game to get up and running these days. The 2003 version we didn't. That one's actually really hard to track down. I think probably the biggest one that we've looked at are kind of the open source variations of the game. So there's a couple of open source unlicensed versions of Axis and Allies that are out there. We did look at them for kind of how they handle user interface, content, all sorts of different things. But we really decided kind of at the end of the day to really just kind of push forward and try our own hand at kind of making the best game possible rather than trying to make an enhanced version of something that had already been done. So while we did look at them for what had been done, we didn't really focus on trying to address the failures or the successes of those games. We just really wanted to focus on, what's our vision for the game? What can we do with this game? How can we make this like a Beamdog game essentially, and then kind of push forward with that?
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I've played a few kind of Axis and Allies. I forgot there was one for the iPad, which I did a review on, but it's no longer in the App Store. I'll have to put the description and the name in the show notes. Oh, it's called Ambition.
Yeah.
And I played that one, and it was available on the US side, and it was kind of almost like, it was a little like Axis and Allies. I wouldn't say it was the experience that I know and love. But then they took it off the US store. Now I think it's only available in the UK. So if you're in England, you can still play the game, but everybody else in the world cannot. I thought that was weird. But I really love that you guys actually brought in the full game. Like, as I'm playing, I do feel like I'm actually playing, which is kind of weird because considering I played it on a board game like 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And playing it on a computer, and I still get that like, wow, I'm actually playing Axis and Allies. Like, I feel that flavor, it's kind of like something you haven't tasted for a couple of years. And like, oh, that's what that would taste like,
Yeah, we tried to be as kind of faithful to the board game as possible. Obviously, we did make some changes here or there, like I mentioned earlier, for the asynchronous play. But one of the other pillars of the game was to be as faithful as possible to 1942 second edition. So what that came down to, some of the visual aesthetics, the game map, how we handled the dice rolls, how we handled combat, that kind of stuff. Just kind of trying to make sure that it felt as much like playing the board game as possible while being accessible, while being a little bit more of a streamlined process, for sure.
I'm just glad you guys didn't go the 2003 version, because I think in that version they had the map, but every time two armies collided, it went into like a command and conquer kind of mode, which was really weird.
Yeah, it was kind of like instead of doing the dice rolls, I think it would zoom into, yeah, like a army versus army kind of real time strategy game, if I remember correctly. I've seen videos of it. It's definitely an interesting take on the game. That's one of those ones that's taking a little bit more creative liberty with the game rather than kind of doing that direct adaptation.
Yeah, I love that you guys stayed true to it because I was playing it the other day, and every time the dice rolled, and like when you see the numbers finally stop down, and you finally got that roll of 2 to kill the other player, it was just it gets that excitement level to like that point that I really really enjoy and really loved it.
Oh yeah, no, this game is a game of emotional highs and emotional very lows. There's been many times where I've been doing a demo, either maybe for Wizards of the Coast or for like internal at the studio, and people are watching me roll, and oh man, I've got the absolute worst luck in this game. I will roll terribly, almost 80% of the time, and then that one time it doesn't happen, and that rolls good for me. It feels real nice, and it kind of keeps me playing, but. Oh boy, my luck on this game is atrocious.
My luck with any dice games, I'm really horrible. I should like bring my girlfriend with me, and so she can actually roll the dice. Because I'm horrible with that. My luck is just horrendous.
That's why I play in D&D right now. One of my main campaigns, I'm playing a Divination Wizard, so that's a halfling. So I'm that guy who's trying to control the outcome of the dice as much as possible because my luck is just that bad. I got tired of dealing with it, so yeah, I kind of went the halfling divination scummy type wizard. So, but hey, it's fun for me.
Nice. What's really interesting, and it definitely there's a shift that I've noticed versus like board gamers versus digital gamers, and like I would say a division there. The reason being is like when I played Axis and Allies, we had to make sure like we had probably like 4 maybe or 5 hours to play the whole game among like 2 or 3 of us. I remember we would start at like 11, we would finish at like 5 or 6, and it would be a long thing. Sometimes like, when it was the end of your turn, you had a good maybe 40 minutes, maybe even sometimes an hour before, your turn would come up again, because some people would think and like, all right, well, I want to do this. And it's almost like chess where it takes a while. And we were playing it the other day, and I noticed one of the people I was playing with, he was kind of like, I can't believe it's been 45 minutes. I haven't yet to go. And I'm like, and he was just like, I don't understand why it's taking so long for me to get to play. And I'm like, well, this is Axis and Allies, like, I don't think he actually never played the board game. So he was totally unaccustomed that it is a long game. It's not like, it's like almost like Risk. Risk would actually take quicker than this game, and that's kind of why I love this game, because it's kind of like the first real strategy game when I was playing with board games.
Yeah, it's we all like to joke about how long Axis and Allies can take to play sometimes, especially even like when you factor in setup into it as well too, because the game does take a while to set up. That's kind of one of those appeals of that asynchronous nature. Like it's just like, oh hey, cool, you took your turn. Or I took my turn. I don't have to sit here for an hour, just watching you do your thing. I can go off and do my own thing again. So, like, I remember playing, the very first time I ever played Axis and Allies was when I was in school. We had a games lab type thing, and we were doing an analog board game study. And my teacher decided he wanted us to play, like, a long-form strategy game. So we had the choice, I think, between Axis and Allies 1940 Global Edition or Diplomacy, and we ended up settling on Axis and Allies. And I think it took the class, I think our class size was somewhere around 24, 25. So we kind of split off into 2 halves. One side was the Axis, one side was the Allies. And we just kind of took our turns concurrently as a group. I think that took us 3 days to play. And like we were taking pictures of the game board when we broke for lunch. When we left at the end of the day, like we were making sure that like everyone knew kind of the state of the game. So if someone came in and tried to tinker with the board, or like the cleaners would come in and like move things around, exactly what was going on. We would have like paper treaties, like we went all out with it. So yeah, definitely it's a game that lends itself to that long form gameplay, which to let's say like 20-year-old me, massively appealing, to 32-year-old me, massively appealing, but I realize I don't have the time for that anymore. So it's great to be able to have that kind of experience, but I don't have to sit there and wait. Like I can take my turn, I can hop back into work and keep working on the stuff that I'm doing at Beamdog, or if I'm at home, I can have it running on my second monitor while I'm playing something else or doing something else, and that's fantastic. And I do love that, to the point where like I've gone out and searched out other games of this ilk, especially on like my phone or on my computer, to have those kind of like always have something that I can do, not something that I need to do.
Yeah,
which is fantastic.
Yeah, when you were mentioning, like if anybody changed a board, it kind of reminds me of that Seinfeld episode with Newman coming in, trying to do this board. So one thing that I was going through the Steam page on Access and Allies, one thing that I was extremely grateful, and I can't tell you how extremely grateful I am, because like I am enthralled by this. And you guys brought Access and Allies to not only the Windows platform, but the Mac and the Linux platform, I believe, right?
Yep.
So that's awesome. Like, so I'm kind of curious, what kind of encouraged you to do that? Because a lot of games that I notice, a lot of the strategy games that I play, I would say probably about half of them are only Windows only. Was that like, did you guys want to like grab as many of the audience, as many gamers as possible, like touch on like Mac gamers and Linux gamers?
Yeah, of course. So that was definitely the case. We definitely want to hit as many people as possible. The engine that we built Access and Allies on is kind of a custom tech stack of it's not like a dedicated game engine per se. It uses a lot of kind of web technologies and stuff like that. So a lot of it was designed and chosen to be able to be used on as many platforms as possible, kind of when it was all put together. So definitely one of the core tenets of Beamdog is our games on as many platforms as possible, reaching as many people as possible. So that holds true for Access and Allies as well too. So yeah, definitely almost from the beginning. I don't think there was any point in time where any of the three platforms that we launched on weren't available. It's kind of been concurrent that all three throughout all of the development were available for developing on or playing the game on. There was a good period of time actually where I think more than half of the team, almost 3/4 of the team, were actually developing on Mac rather than on Windows.
Oh, wow.
That's shifted a little bit now where the majority of the team is working on Windows, but we are looking at diversifying it a little bit more again in the future. So we're getting a couple more people up and running on Linux and a couple more people up and running on Mac, so that's a fairly even split. Because there's some people who have some devs who have kind of mentioned interest in kind of switching platforms. So yeah, it's just something that when we chose the tech stack, that was definitely one of the reasons why we chose the stack that we worked in. And it's paid off great because yeah, the fact that the game is available to anyone who can basically download Steam is just that many more people that everyone can play with. So we definitely didn't want to exclude any platforms for no real reason.
Yeah, I'm very grateful for that. I've worked for both companies. I've worked for Apple and I've worked for Microsoft, and I got a chance to play in both sandboxes, and I do prefer the Mac and the iOS platform. And knowing that like some of my favorite games are on this platform is just awesome, and I really appreciate that you guys developing for the Mac, because now I can play it every time I'm on my Mac instead of boot camping into Windows.
Yeah, as someone who uses a MacBook at work, the thought of having to switch constantly back and forth was not appealing to me. So, no, it's great that it works on both.
And is it like, from what I noticed, like maybe I'm wrong, but when I start a Steam game on my Mac side and I'm playing Access and Allies and I save it, I notice when I go on the Windows side that game I can continue. Am I correct? Because I think I was playing yesterday, and as I was going through it, I was like, wait, is this the same game I was playing yesterday on my Mac side?
Yep. So all of the games online are stored on our servers. So it doesn't matter if you play on a Mac or Windows or Linux machine and you go to a different machine. So long as you log into the same Steam accounts and the same user account, you will see your online games. Depending on your computer's configuration, if it's sharing folder locations between different partitions or whatever the case may be, it is possible. The local games are stored locally on your machine, so The game itself is not biased as far as what platform it is. It's basically just kind of where the files are located and if you can read them or not. So it's entirely possible that your local games would also work between like Boot Camp and Mac OS.
Wow, that's awesome. I knew I had a feeling like I was playing. I was like, wait, did I just have a few too many drinks yesterday? Let's figure out. Like, so that's pretty awesome.
We are also looking into cloud saving on Steam for some of the local games as well too. So being able to back up your local games to Steam Cloud and then download them on another computer, whatever the case may be for your local games, just so that you have that extra layer of backup just in case you uninstall the game accidentally or you need to reinstall it to resolve an issue with a game state or something like that. So definitely things to look forward to as far as just kind of increasing that kind of cross compatibility as well too.
You were mentioning earlier that you guys were using a game engine. Is there are you guys using like an open source one like Unity, or do you guys have like a proprietary one that you guys developed in-house?
So it's not a game engine per se. Like I said, it's more of a handful of different technologies kind of combined into one. Most of it being kind of web tech, so web technologies to make the game. So it's not necessarily like a dedicated game engine like a Unity or an Unreal. It's kind of an amalgamation of different things in order to kind of make the game and have it be available on as many platforms as humanly possible.
Okay, awesome. Kind of was shocked about how many engines are out on the market right now.
Yeah, there's a lot of them. They all have their pros and their cons. All sorts of different like tutorials and documentation and stuff like that. It's all about trying to identify kind of a lot of them now, like Unity or Unreal, for instance. You can do almost any genre game in either of them. It's just how much you need to kind of work to get that back end or that foundation or structure of your game working in that engine as possible. So it's just the amount of time and effort you want to put into it, basically. Making a strategy game, you can even hop into something like a StarCraft 2 and use their real-time engine for the Galaxy editor, I believe. And you can make almost anything in that now, I think, too.
Really?
Yeah.
I wasn't aware of that.
There's people who made like a StarCraft MMO inside of the StarCraft 2 engine. I've seen all sorts of different crazy stuff in there. I think even like some of the built-in game editors, like the StarCraft 2 one, I think also even allow like model importing now. I know the old Warcraft 3 one back in the day did. But yeah.
You guys have Access and Allies. It is in early access. One question I had is, since it's in early access, you guys coming out with the 1942 version of it, is there a possibility that you're going to continue developing the product with future DLCs, maybe tackling other parts of the war, maybe even other wars entirely?
We definitely want to keep working on 1942 second edition for now. That's kind of the primary focus. Depending on how things go, we would love to kind of look at the rest of Access and Allies as like a brand. But right now we're just extremely focused on refining the 1942 second edition experience and getting that to a really, really good spot before we start looking at other platforms or maybe other box sets. So at this point in time, we're just kind of keenly focused on 1942 and we really don't have anything to further announce on future box sets or anything like that.
Yeah, because I know the Access and Allies kind of genre is like, I was just kind of surprised at how many variations of the game there are.
Yeah, there's a lot of different box sets, and definitely one thing we've learned since we launched is everyone has their own favorite box set. So yeah, there's a lot of different, I think there's a large community out there for a variety of the different box sets. That being said, each box set has its own kind of rule set and feature set that sets it apart from all the other ones. So they're all going to take a lot of time to look at and examine, design and develop and all that kind of stuff. So right now we're just, like I said, keenly focused on 1942 second edition and making sure that that's the best game it possibly can be before we start looking at other options.
So I was playing the other day with Tortuga and Matt, and we were kind of going through the game, and he chose 1942 edition, but I noticed as he was clicking that there was something on the right-hand side, and I forgot the name of it. It's called, it was like a different rule set. And kind of Matt went into it, and he was saying that you could play the standard in 1942, but there's an alternate variant that you guys included that kind of allow England to survive a little bit more easier, because apparently the 1942 rules make it so easy to knock out the English Navy. And I noticed you guys included this option. Was that something you guys, like, from the beginning were like, we need to add this because the English Navy is going to be gone the first turn?
Yeah, so what you're talking about is the starting conditions. So the last patch we added in a new starting condition, which is the Larry Harris Gen Con version 3 variants. So Larry Harris is the original designer and developer of Axis and Allies way back in the 80s. He's had a hand in almost every version of Axis and Allies that's launched up until I think maybe 1942 Second Edition or Zombies. He was directly designing them. So when 1942 Second Edition came out and they were looking at doing tournaments with it, they looked at some balancing with it and some alternate starting conditions to take a look at kind of different ways to balance the game. So we when we launched the game, it came with the out-of-the-box setup, which kind of had that starting configuration that definitely playing as some of the allied powers, there was maybe a little bit more challenge. Definitely not insurmountable, but definitely more challenge. This variation just kind of changes some of that balance or some of that starting configuration to make it a little bit less difficult for those allied powers to maybe get off the ground. So it's just an alternate balancing of it. I wouldn't say it's necessarily a superior balance or a subpar balance compared to the out-of-the-box one. It's just a variation for some players that may find that starting configuration more suitable to them or more appealing to them. This is something we wanted to do for a while. It wasn't necessarily specifically for the Larry Harris variant, but adding in different starting conditions that kind of change that initial layout of the map was something that we definitely wanted to do, and we are looking forward to further building out on those starting conditions. So alternate variations that you haven't found in the box, stuff that we've designed in-house, just new ways to play the game, to keep it fresh, to keep it interesting, just to keep building Axis and Allies 1942 online to be not only the best place to play Axis and Allies 1942 Second Edition on a computer, but to play Axis and Allies in general.
That's great that you guys are going to continue adding to this and altering different ways to play the game. Is there a possibility that the fans can actually mod the game? Is there a way to do that?
Out of the box, no. I know that Beamdog does have a history of kind of user-generated content with the Baldur's Gate games and Neverwinter Nights and stuff like that. With Axis and Allies online right now, we don't have any plans currently to allow for user-created content at this time. Never say never, but at this time, that's not currently in our scope. But we are looking forward to providing unique and interesting ways to play the game beyond the standard out-of-the-box setup. So I'm hoping that the fans and the community are going to really, really like the kind of stuff that we're going to keep putting into the game as we move forward.
I definitely will. That's for sure. I can't wait for every update that pops up and any things that you guys add. I'm just more than grateful for it, because this is definitely, when you guys announced this, I think it was a couple months ago when you guys kind of like made the initial press release. I was kind of like, I literally almost fell off my chair because I was like, finally, it's 2019. I tell you, the last couple of years, I was always like asking people, I was like, why don't we have an Axis and Allies PC game? Like, it's 2018 or 2017, and finally it's 2019. We have it, so I can knock one thing off my bucket list.
Yeah.
I guess that covers everything for me. The last question that I have is one question that we always ask in every episode, and it's the middle of the day at 4 o'clock my time, and I know it's 3 o'clock your time, and you're probably not, but I always ask, what are you drinking?
The air. I totally forgot I had a cup of coffee upstairs, but I left it upstairs because I'm a fool.
How do you think? What kind of coffee do you drink? Because we have some. We're thinking about changing the name of the show. jokingly, but because majority of all of us just drink coffee while we're doing the podcast.
Yeah. I think right now in my house we got McDonald's McCafe coffee.
Oh, okay.
Which I know is like almost heresy up here in Canada with all the Tim Hortons stuff, but to be honest, it's just better. I've never bought into the Tim Hortons kind of Canada stereotype. That's the one Canadian thing I don't partake in very frequently. So
Tim Hortons is kind of like the equivalent of like a Wawa down here, right?
Yeah, or like a Dunkin' Donuts almost. Probably I would give it a better comparison to. They're literally on every corner. Like the city that I live in has got like 60,000 people in it, and I think we've got like 7 Tim Hortons, maybe more. Yeah, it's pretty ridiculous. The further east in Canada you go, so if you're on like the Maritimes on like the far east coast or even in Ontario and Toronto, they are, I don't know, everyone's got their own personal Tim Hortons. A lot of my family's from Nova Scotia, which is like right on the east coast, and I remember going up, there's like one intersection in a random like space on a highway, and there's like 4 Tim Hortons all on each corner. And I was like, is that Bob's Tim Hortons? Is that Jim's Tim Hortons? Like, why are there just 4 random Tim Hortons in the middle of nowhere on a corner, like in a random intersection corner on a highway? Like,
yeah, that's pretty nuts.
It's almost as bad as like Starbucks in Seattle. I remember I went down to PAX one year. There's an intersection like just outside of downtown, I think, or right inside downtown, that's got 5 Starbucks all like in one intersection.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
it's ridiculous. Like they're competing with each other.
Well, they're probably all owned by the same guy. There's so many people. There's so much traffic that you need to be able to serve all those people. So chances are, yeah, they're all owned by the same person.
Yeah, I'm kind of on that bandwagon. I'm a Starbucks. I usually get my iced coffee from there, black, and I love. Like a lot of people criticize, like, well, Starbucks this and Starbucks that, but I really love the taste of their coffee, and a lot of people say why. I was like, because it almost tastes like it's burnt. I don't think it's burnt, but it tastes like it's burnt, and it's so acidic that I really love it. And
yeah, it's a bit bitter.
Yes,
it's a bit bitter, and the story that I've heard is it's bitter to get you to buy their syrups. So you buy their coffee, and they get you want to sweeten it to balance out the bitterness, so you get the flavored syrups or whatever that they have into the coffee for the that 30 cents or whatever. That's the story that I hear.
Oh, I did not know that. They charge per every time I just get my coffee black, so I don't add anything, even like milk. But they charge for the syrups.
The syrups, yeah. Most places do. I think it's like 30 cents most places, or at least up here it is. So like even if I go to McDonald's and I want like a sugar-free vanilla in my coffee, yeah, it would be like 30 cents, I think.
Wow, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
I'll just bring my own sugar next time. I mean,
yeah, like I normally just have mine like as a double essentially, which is kind of like 2 milk or cream and 2 sweetener or sugar. So
wow,
it's normally how I have mine. Yeah. I can do black, but it's not my preferred method. I'm not that much of a refined coffee drinker yet.
I started with like milk and sugar, and then I think it was just on the basis of I remember it was at the time when I was still working at Apple, and I forgot, this was during I think iPhone 6, or like there was a lot of long sleepless nights, and I noticed I went from like white like milk coffee where it was like light brown to by the end of the launch it was completely black with nothing in it.
Yeah, you just need it as fast as possible. You couldn't be bothered putting stuff in it.
Yeah, and then ever since then it was just kind of like black all the time. And my girlfriend was telling me, like, she was driving and bringing me the coffee, and she kind of confused hers with mine, and she took a sip of it, and she was gagging on the way home, and I was like, oh, all right, I'll just get my own coffee next time. I don't want you to like go get in a crash.
I like to do intermittent fasting, and when I'm doing fasting, I'll do bulletproof coffee, which is like a tablespoon of butter and a tablespoon of coconut oil or MCT oil in the coffee, blend it together, and that's actually really good. It sounds disgusting, but it's actually really good. Kind of gives it like a latte texture and flavor almost. You put like a little bit of like a stevia, like a French vanilla stevia or something like that, and you're basically just drinking a French vanilla latte almost.
Oh wow, okay, I might have to try that.
Don't do it unless you're doing intermittent fasting. Because it's basically like you're having like a cup of pure fat. And the whole point is to basically be your body, when you're doing intermittent fasting or keto or any of those kind of high fat, low carb diets, is your body is metabolizing fat before everything else. So if you're not metabolizing fat before everything else, then you're just going to be drinking a cup of fat, which is not particularly healthy on its own. So unless you're doing either one of those, I would avoid doing it for health reasons.
Probably better than the Burger King that I ate yesterday, though.
Probably on par at the very least. We got a couple of Burger Kings up here still, but they're in my city at least, they're kind of a dying breed.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they came up and they were here for quite some time, and a lot of them have closed down now. There's still a handful, but there's definitely not as many as there were.
Yeah, I noticed a lot of people kind of going into more healthier options. Like down here in Virginia now, everybody's doing Chick-fil-A.
Mm-hmm.
So like that's replacing the McDonald's or Burger Kings around here. And I know from Brooklyn, like I'm originally from Brooklyn, so like over there it's more like it's being replaced by like cafes and independent restaurants, which is really awesome because a lot of times you would just go to the corner and there's like a brand new restaurant serving a new type of dinner menu or lunch menu, and like the old fast food is kind of being like removed. At least the parts of Brooklyn that I live in or I visit in, they're kind of like a dying breed over there from what I noticed.
Yeah, fast food is definitely not dying up here. I think it's just like certain brands aren't moving forward a lot. Most of them kind of, I want to say, a little bit more American brands rather than the Canadian ones, or they just like came into Canada and they just kind of assumed that everything would go perfectly fine and then just haven't. So like we still got a lot of McDonald's. They're doing great up here. Subway, stuff like that. We don't have Chick-fil-A in Edmonton, but I know they've just started spawning up in Vancouver, so I'm sure it's a matter of time before they start showing up here. But I have had it, and it is good. We've got a couple of restaurants that are like it, but like we have one that's called Freshie, which is a lot like Chick-fil-A. Those are definitely starting to pop up a little bit more. I don't call them fast food; they're more like medium food, where I have to go in and order my food and wait for it, but it does come relatively quickly. It's medium food.
Yeah, I've noticed the Chick-fil-A being a little bit more healthier. So like I try not to, I really don't kind of like, I know it looks like a McDonald's, like it kind of is almost like, it looks like a fast food restaurant, but I feel like that food is a bit more healthier. Like, and maybe I'm wrong, but I notice when I eat it, I don't feel like like I ate poison down my belly,
Yeah.
But that's all I have. Did you have any things that we wanted to cover or anything you wanted to add to for the interview?
No, I think we got just about everything.
Thank you for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. I do want to say a heartfelt thank you for finally bringing this legendary board game to the digital platform. And personally, I love this game. It's, the UI that you guys made, the sound, and, a lot of, I don't know if you guys got feedback for this, but like, I really like you guys took particular attention to the animations, and I really appreciate that. Like, even just the dice rolls, you guys could have took the shortcut and be like, okay, let's just put a static image here, a static image here. Now, you guys made some really nice animations, kind of made it much more fluid of a game.
Well, thank you. I will definitely pass that on to the art team. Especially a lot of the comments that we've got, or commentary that we've gotten so far, a lot of people do really appreciate the dice rolls. They just want to be able to speed up through them. So we've definitely been putting in ways to disable some of those animations. So it is really good to hear the appreciation for some of those animations. We do realize that they do kind of slow down the game sometimes, but a lot of care and time went into those. So it does feel good to hear that praise, and I will definitely pass that on to the folks who worked on those.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Cody. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday.
You too. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
And that does it for episode 43 of the Single Malt Strategy Podcast. We'll see you next time.